It is a contradiction to have a chaplain who is an atheist.
An atheist can play a critical role as a chaplain.
The American Religious Town Hall is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here is your host and moderator.
Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you join us today. My name is Andrea Luxton. I'm today's moderator, and we have a fascinating conversation ahead of us. I would like, first of all, you to meet our team, and I'll start on our right.
My name is Bishop Michael Olson, and I serve as the Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fort Worth, Texas.
My name is Rabbi Dan Levin. I serve as Senior Rabbi at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton, Florida.
Hi, I'm Carl Troval. I'm Professor of Ethics and History at Concordia University in Austin, Texas.
And my name is Mel ROBECK. I'm Senior Professor of Church History and Ecumenics, as well as Special Assistant to the President for Ecumenical Relations at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. I'm also an ordained minister with the Assemblies of God.
And now to today's topic. At the end of August 2021, Greg Epstein, an avowed atheist and humanist rabbi, was elected by the other chaplains at Harvard to be their president. Framing his philosophy, Epstein is quoted in the New York Times saying, "We don't look to a God for answers, we are each other's answers." His appointment and his communications since that appointment has raised considerable concern among some individuals of faith who see this appointment as a blow to the validity of faith. Others, such as the previous president of the chaplains, Rabbi Jonah Steinberg, expressed concern too, but more with the perceived self-promotion of Epstein himself. Steinberg claims the position is only administrative and not about theology, and Epstein should act that way. The appointment, however, is largely supported by the Harvard community. His appointment shows that Harvard University has moved a long way from its inception, when the motto was "Truth for Christ and the Church." Yet its students are no longer Puritan clergy, but students of all faiths and no faith. The panel is asked to consider the following questions. 1. What message do you think it sends about Harvard University when the president of the chaplains is an atheist? 2. Can you separate administrative responsibilities as the president of the chaplains from a statement about faith? And finally, is it a contradiction in terms to have a chaplain who is a self-avowed atheist? Or is that necessary in a time when non-believers also need spiritual support? And we're going to turn to those who introduced our topic first to hear their further comments.
Well, this appointment is not like the appointment of a head chaplain of Harvard. First of all, it's an organization of 40 different chaplains, and there's a rotation as far as facilitating meetings and communication between the administration of Harvard and the chaplains as a group. And I think that's important for clarity because I think in fairness of discourse, that Harvard not be accused of somehow just embracing a full-on atheistic or endorsing an atheistic stance when they're not, at least not formally. The challenge is, though, I think, is that with regard to contradiction of being a chaplain and an atheist, is that there's more to this than just simply administration or organizing a community. Atheism does take a direct stance on the existence of God, but also, in a sense, then there's a proverb that says that atheists are people who've grown impatient with God. In a sense, it can be a formal rejection of God, and it can be a formal rejection of spirituality. Because the question then is, we turn to spirituality, we turn to God, especially when we recognize our powerlessness. When we realize that we can't do everything, even us together as a group, but ultimately rely on God and cooperate with a God. And so the statement of the organization of this chaplain is that humanism is a progressive life stance that, without supernaturalism, affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment, aspiring to humanity's greater good. There's something noble about that, but if we don't recognize an ultimate that's beyond our own abilities and capacities, we'll soon create a God, whether it's the God of politics or a God of our own making, whatever that is, our own preferences. And I think that's the problem and the challenge with calling a chaplain and an atheist. I think that's the contradiction.
Go.
Thank you, Mike. I'm really glad that you began by explaining a little bit about the administrative role and kind of the nature of the chaplaincy at Harvard. And I think it is important to point out that he was elected by other chaplains. It isn't as if this was a decision of the administration that came top down. It was a communal group that decided they wanted this person. And I've read some of the other chaplains who said that this person really was well suited to the job. To the particular responsibilities. And I imagine that depending on the definition and role that a person takes, if it's the role is to advocate on behalf of a divine being, it might be a problematic position, but that isn't the particular role here. I think the other piece that I find that I'm appreciative is that I sometimes think that people think, well, there are people who believe in God, and then there are just people who don't, as if you don't, it somehow is not a kind of ultimate philosophical worldview. To say there is no divinity is a worldview, and if you will, you're believing that on faith as much as you're believing that a God exists on faith. And in some ways, I like the affirmation here with this appointment that at least you're affirming that there's a community of people who don't believe in God, but they want to collectively come together and have an organization that may need leadership to help move forward in terms of their ethical commitments. And I guess where I'm going with this is that I have some friends and family members who are agnostic or atheist, and one of the struggles they have is all their friends go to worship during the week and have a community of moral support. They find themselves isolated. They don't have a community necessarily to bond together with other than maybe a social organization. And they're looking for a place where they could go to meet with one another to form that kind of moral community. And I think that those moral communities of atheists, agnostics, whoever they are, would be an important piece of what I guess I would call a spiritual life, but I think it is a spiritual life of sorts, depending on how you want to define spiritual. That is to say, you're interested in the flourishing of who we are as human, and so I don't find this to be threatening at all.
Right, thank you very much. How about our other panelists? Any perspectives?
I was intrigued by the way he's described. First of all, I'm a rabbi. Okay, and rabbis have training. They have training in Scripture. They have Talmudic training. They have Mishnaic training. They have texts to draw from. They have a tradition. They have a history. Whether they believe in God or not, they have these texts that can be useful and helpful for them in telling stories, in helping in counseling situations, and so forth. So I look at that and say, well, I would never hire a person who was an atheist to be a chaplain, but I can understand how this person has something to draw from that could be useful to students at Harvard. Second thing is, he describes himself as a humanist. And I think if we think about humanism, we have to go back to the Renaissance. Because prior to that time, you had the church was responsible for all spiritual life. And there was, unfortunately, too much of a distinction, or I should say, too much of an emphasis on heaven and hell. That was it. And what humanism did was say, no, we have to take seriously the present, and we have to take seriously our place in the present. And it's out of that humanistic kind of background that we ended up with art and education, with medicine, with science, with all these different kinds of things, that we finally decided it isn't all just about God. God's not the only actor in history. We also have a role to play, a place to work and do things that could be useful and helpful to the society as a whole. And so I think if he even thinks about his own humanistic past, even if he wants to think about it in evolutionary terms, that's okay with me, understanding that humanism has contributed some baselines from which we continue to grow and to learn. So I think that's also helpful. And then as I think about him as an atheist, I'm not personally convinced that there are any such people as atheists. I think in the end, everybody figures that out. And they may be scared, but but I don't think they'll be atheists in the end. So that maybe is cutting them off a little bit short, but I don't think so. I do think that he can bring insights into the unbelieving world, if so to speak, that could be also helpful, not only to the unbelieving students, but also to believing students, to think seriously about how all of these things go together. And finally, I would say, I think that this really does show the drift of not Harvard only, but all major universities that were founded by churches. It's the church that gave these universities life in the first place. And they then turned them loose to allow their humanistic implants to chart the directions that they've gone. It may not be a place to train clergy. I wouldn't send my sons to Harvard Divinity School today, simply because I don't think they have anything to offer to my sons for our particular tradition. But it may be helpful for others.
Okay, thank you. And now let's have a rabbi's opinion.
So I think, what is the role of a chaplain in a university environment? Yeah. And to me, when a student is an undergraduate or even in graduate school, it's a critical time of spiritual and moral formation. Yeah. It's, for many students, their first time trying to form their identity independent of the household in which they grew up. And so in Jewish tradition, the Hebrew word Yisrael means one who wrestles with God. And I think that college and graduate school is a time of a lot of wrestling. And a good chaplain is someone who's going to support that wrestling and is going to support that exploration of belief and faith and religious identity. But one of the things also that I think is important for a chaplain to provide for students is a model of what a passionate, committed religious life looks like. For so many of our students that come from my synagogue and head off to college, their only model of religious life is the household in which they grew and the experiences they had within our congregation. They head off to college and then they get to explore religious life in a very different way, and the role models that they experience there, whether it's in a Jewish context like Hillel or a Chabad house or in a Catholic context like the Newman community or others, they get to experience a new religious guide in ways that can be absolutely transformative. And so I think it's crucial that for those who come from a strong religious belief, or those who come from a questioning religious belief, or those students who come from an atheistic belief, are given the permission and the role models and the spaces within the religious community on campus to really explore and to wrestle with what it is they want to be and believe.
So if I could push that a little bit, are you saying that someone who is an atheist can't effectively do that?
No, I think that an atheist probably can do that, so long as that person is open to role modeling and to inspiring students to explore what a passionate religious life can mean in very, very different ways across the sort of depth and breadth of religious expression.
Thank you. Bishop Olson.
Oh, I think these are all very good points. One of the big challenges, I think, just in general for us in religion and spirituality is indifference. I think more than ever, there's I think that the the development of, or rather a growth of the number of people who identify as no religion at all, or as atheists or humanists, has been, I think it's something about 24%, up from 16% in the 90s, the most recent Pew survey said. And I think that I wonder what the relationship is with that, with the growing intolerance and hostility in our civil discourse as well with that. I think that people have their sense of a highest good in life is an affluent lifestyle, one without problems, one without connections to other people. And they look for some sort of a philosophy that can reinforce that. And I think that, as the rabbi said, something that a chaplain, especially in a college setting, does is precisely challenge that. But to do so has to really come out of a committed tradition of some sort that's identifiable, because otherwise it's there's no tension that's necessary for the growth and development of a person's spirituality and self-identification and incorporation into a religious body of some sort. I think this is a postmodern challenge for all of us, but ultimately everybody's got to make some sense of a commitment, even if it's committed indifference. It's committed to misery and isolation. But
I'd like to. One of the things, I think part of the reason why atheism and humanism sometimes makes me uncomfortable is because, in some ways, if you take the idea of a higher power out of the equation, what do you have left to worship? Human beings worship. The question is, what will we worship? And I sometimes fear that atheism and humanism leads to a worship of the self, which in many ways is really the ultimate idolatry. And one of the things that you often find, I think, on college campuses is that at the age of 18, I have a few of these animals that live in my household, they know everything.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Really?
And part of what I think a great undergraduate or graduate experience does is it breaks down that arrogance and replaces that with some measure of humility about, you know what, there's a whole lot out there that you don't know. And so there's enough arrogance already on college campuses where students think they kind of know everything that I think that's why religious life and the introduction of religious spirituality can be so important in the formation of a young student.
I even run into some professors like that.
Well, they do know everything.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. I guess that is a distinction.
and with that comes the narcissism, which social media doesn't help a lot of times either. I mean, there's a means to it, but you're right. It's a sense of ultimate, of the ultimate we encounter, one that we're powerless over. The other thing that happens, I think, sometimes is then religion and the spirituality gets replaced also by superstition. I mean, to me, that is always, the most rational of society. In so many ways, is accompanied with sort of a type of a spiritual disposition towards God or towards elements beyond us, where we try to manipulate and cajole it, and make sense out of it that way. And that's a dangerous way to live life. And I think that leads us into the idolatry of slavery, of being enslaved to something, to our own thoughts and fears of not only God but our neighbor.
So 30 seconds.
Yes, I want to agree with you, Dan, that a secular form of humanism with no divine being, no God, is a real problem for me. But humanism began as a Christian enterprise, and I think that the statement that Harvard made that was truth for Christ and the church tells us there is a tie there between the reality of what the church is about and what they're attempting to do as a university. It's when when that gets separated that it becomes problematic. And I think that in a situation today where most of these, quote, Christian universities have become non-Christian or secular, I think there's a major problem.
Good.
A major break.
Thank you. Great conversation. And we are now going to have a break.
We hope you're enjoying today's program. If you'd like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the vision and history of the program, and we invite you to become a ministry partner, explore our Town Hall Estates healthcare facilities, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, we look forward to receiving your letters. You may write us at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. If you have a prayer request, please send it to prayerrequest@americanreligious.org. Thank you for writing and thank you for watching. Now, back to today's closing statements.
Welcome back, and please do take that invitation seriously. We do love to hear from you. Please send us your messages and your ideas. And we're now moving into our concluding statements from our panel. Bishop Olson.
Human beings are remarkable beings with a remarkable nature. They are free. They have the capacity to love. They have a capacity to make decisions and choose. They have a capacity to hate. They have a capacity as well to laugh and to grasp some sense of an ultimate and universals out of a series of experiences in which then language can be formed with agreement and further disagreement. When human beings, though, forget that there's an ultimate that's beyond that, and when they encounter those things that are beyond their power, and they seek to impose their own power or their own worldview on that without accountability to a sense of, in a recognition that basically there are limits to all of our capacities, we soon begin to form a God in our own image instead of recognizing that through all of these gifts and capacities that I've covered, that is which in my tradition we come to recognize as being created in the image and likeness of God.
I agree, Dan, with you when you say that. I think that the ultimate kind of goal of any chaplain is to make sure that students fairly and honestly wrestle with the deep spiritual questions they have about who they are and wrestle with God or no God. And I think back to my own role as chaplain, and I would hope, even as I've had students struggle with asking questions about God in my own office, I want to be empathetic to their struggle, to say the questions you ask are hard questions, and I don't have answers for all of them. I have a way of looking at them, but I want to be fair to their journey. And if there's a chaplain who can help all the other chaplains in being honest with students who come to them to wrestle with all those deep questions and to not pre-conclude something, but continue, I think that person deserves a place at the table as a chaplain. And I think the other piece is that every university's got to decide what their own mission is and how they're going to approach it. Harvard is a pluralistic community. They've decided to go that direction, and they need to have a chaplaincy that reflects that.
Thank you.
As I think about that, once again, coming back to the question of atheists and whether there are such things, there's certainly people, a wide range of people who've experienced what they would consider to be the absence of God in their lives, or the absence of God in history, or the absence of God in a variety of places, even in their worship setting, And one only needs to look at places like in historic churches, the dark night of the soul, where it just feels like God is not hearing me. All I'm doing is talking to the ceiling. Nothing is happening. Or you could look to the Holocaust and you say, now where was God there? I mean, after all, the Jewish people were persecuted in ways that none of us have ever had to go through. And I think that that's another place. Or we could talk about even the way we've treated Native Americans or slaves or whatever. Where is God in all of this? The amazing thing to me is that so many of them come out as people of faith. And that's always been a surprise to me. So I don't want to come down too hard on the fact that we have a chaplain who is an atheist. At the same time, I realize that as a humanist, what that basically says is that we're taking seriously human reason. And I think that's a great thing, and I think we're intended to do that. But the reality is that oftentimes people will say, well, yes, I'm a sinful creature, But that doesn't affect my mind. It doesn't affect my reasoning. And I think it does. I think all of us have to be very humble when it comes to whether or not we are mindful of our own foibles at the sense of reasoning. So I think he has much to offer. I hope he does well, and I hope he can help his students.
So I think that the light of God's presence extends from the sort of kernel of the universe. And when it comes into our world, it passes through a prism that provides us with that rainbow spectrum of religious expression. And we all grow up in one color, right? In the households or the houses of worship that are our home. And then we head off to campus and we are exposed to other colors. And I think that part of what a chaplaincy does on campus is to give you a spiritual home away from home, where this is where I belong, this is my safe space. And at the same time, an opportunity to be presented with those other colors. And in the same way that our panel explores our own different shades and pieces of that spectrum, also gives us the ability to learn from others as we form our own spiritual selves.
Well, thank you all very much. Thank you for your comments. And as a president of a university myself, this whole issue of what chaplaincy does and how critical that is to the students we have is a very important one. I think the concept of different universities having different missions is very critical here. So, thank you all very much. The Charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestant, Jews, educators and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. And now, friends, until next week at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.